Have you ever had to address somebody or address a situation that you had no idea how to address it, but you knew you had to address it? Have you ever had to give feedback where you were just scared that you were going to hurt somebody's feelings? Have you ever played this out in your mind where you're just so consumed about how they're going to perceive what you're about to say that you end up not saying anything at all? You just procrastinate, and before you know it, so much time went by, it's not even valuable, it's not even relevant to bring that situation up anymore, or the impact is going to be lost because so much time elapsed from that. I want to talk to you about a framework that'll help you provide feedback. Whether it's good or bad, there's a framework that you can use that'll help you guide the conversation. You may still be uncomfortable when you're given the conversation, but at least you have a framework on how to start the conversation and address it. And a lot of times as a manager or supervisor, when you're going to provide feedback, having a framework will help you stay on track. Because sometimes in the moment, we can get off track. We can let our emotions dictate the conversation. We can say things in the heat of the moment that may not be the best. So having a framework ahead of time is really going to help. I came across this framework from a book that I'm reading called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Giving feedback to your employees, whether good or bad, it's just part of the job. It's just part of being a boss. It's just part of elevating the company or your team. You're going to have to address and give feedback. Not just good feedback, you better be giving good feedback as well, because if you're not saying anything to your employees, then their minds are being filled with all kinds of other stuff. And your job as a leader is to make sure that they're not confused and that there's clarity. And they need to know and be reinforced on what good behavior looks like, what a good job looks like, what good performance looks like, as well as what mediocre behavior looks like, what mediocre performance looks like. Your job is to provide feedback, and sometimes that can be scary. I found a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and she gave a really good framework for how to provide good feedback to people. This simple techniques reminds you to describe 3 things when you're giving feedback. Number 1, what was the situation you saw? Number 2, what was the behavior that you saw? What did the person do, either good or bad? And number 3, what was the impact that you observed? If you can remember these 3 things when you're going to give feedback, what's the situation that you observed? What was the behavior that you observed? You're going to be better prepared and provide good feedback to whoever you have to talk to. This framework of situation, behavior, and the impact that you observed is used both for giving good feedback and negative feedback. I've gotten feedback before where the boss always says, "Hey, good job." And then you walk away and you're like, "Well, I wonder what I did that he said good job." It's not good enough just to say good job. You have to be specific. For feedback really to sink in, you have to go a little deeper. And this framework of what was the situation you saw, what was the behavior, and what was the impact you observed. If you can articulate those 3 things to the person that you're giving the feedback to, it's going to be a home run. Many times what happens is if you don't give the feedback relatively quickly, what happens is time waters it down. So now that time has elapsed and the situation doesn't seem as important as it did when it should have been addressed, you end up not addressing it. So the behavior that should have been addressed never gets addressed and nothing changes. In order to address it, it's got to be in a timely manner, like pretty quick. One of my biggest fears is, coming off as a jerk. I don't want to come across as a jerk. I don't want to make people upset. But at the same time, I don't want to continue enabling bad behavior or not addressing things. So I needed some help learning how to address these situations and not letting my emotions get involved. These are some quotes from the book Radical Candor that stuck with me when I read them. When you are overly worried about how people will perceive you, you're less willing to say what needs to be said. And this is something that I struggle with, is caring about what people think of me. I think it's natural for us to be concerned about how people think of us, but it can also be a detriment. we can't live our lives based on how we think other people are going to perceive us. Sometimes what we have to say is it's going to rub people the wrong way. And that's just part of being a supervisor or a manager, is learning to navigate your emotions. When you're overly worried about how people will perceive you, you're less willing to say what needs to be said. I have struggled with this. And when you don't say what needs to be said, nothing gets fixed. The behavior doesn't change that you want to be changed or that needs to be changed. A lot of time your team knows that something needs to be said, but they're waiting for you to say it, and when you're not saying it, then it makes them upset, and it makes you upset because you're not saying it. And you're like, dang it, I need to be saying this, but I'm too scared, or I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I'm worried about what people are going to think. And that's something that we're just going to have to get over. And with practice, you can. Sometimes you just need a little tool, and that tool you just pull out at the right time, and it helps you, guides you in that tough conversation, or even a good conversation that you need to have. Most people want to avoid creating tensions or discomfort at work, and I have totally been there. I'm someone that seeks comfort. I'm somebody, naturally speaking, who wants to take the path of least resistance, and many times nothing is going to change when you take that path. The path forward most of the time is uncomfortable. When bosses are too invested in everyone getting along, they also fail to encourage the people on their team to criticize one another for fear of sowing discord. They create the kind of work environment where being nice is prioritized at the expense of critiquing and therefore improving actual performance. I'm telling you, this is me by default. I just want everyone to get along, and if I feel like everybody's getting along, then everything's good. Having everybody get along is not the ultimate goal. If you're not addressing people because you're afraid of sowing discord or having an environment where people aren't getting along, then that's something that you're going to have to get over. We learn more from our mistakes than our successes, more from criticism than from praise. Why then is it important to give more praise and criticism? Several reasons. First, it guides people in the right direction. It's just as important to let people know what to do more of as to do what to do less of. The best praise does a lot more than just make people feel good. It can actually challenge them directly. It's funny, we're so quick to point out people's mistakes a lot of times, yet we don't point out the things that are doing good. I have struggled with this myself. If everything's going well, you usually don't say anything because everything's going well. But we're not reinforcing good behavior. We're not reinforcing that people are actually doing things within the guidelines. And they need to hear that. They need to do that. They need to hear from you. You shouldn't have the philosophy that no news is good news. They should get a constant feed from you on what they're doing well, not just what needs to be fixed. If the only time that you're addressing people that work for you is when they do bad, I don't like that. I don't like if the only time that they give me feedback is when I do something bad. I want reassurance that I know that I'm doing the right job, that I'm doing the right thing, that this is the right way to go. And you'll get more out of your employees or your team when you're providing positive feedback. This is an intentional act. This isn't something that is typically natural. If somebody makes a mistake, you address it pretty much right away at times because you don't want them to continue doing it. But at the same time, you'll get so much more out of your team when you give them specific feedback for something that you observe them doing good. I'm telling you, encouraging people, giving them feedback on what they're doing good, it's so underrated. It's so easy to just point out something that somebody's doing wrong and forget about encouraging them or acknowledging the things that they're doing good. This is what I love most about this book, Radical Candor, is that framework of giving feedback based on what's the situation, what behavior did you observe, and what was the impact that was observed. You have to get comfortable at addressing people. And as a supervisor and a manager, it's your job to address people. And we need to be able to do it without being a jerk. We need to be able to do it without being fearful. We need to be able to do it in a timely manner so that change, happens, so that clarity is given. Your job as a manager or a supervisor is to minimize confusion. So if you're minimizing confusion, you're bringing clarity to the situation or to the team or to a person. That's your job. Your job is to make sure things are clear. And oftentimes it's going to require dealing with having uncomfortable conversations or holding people accountable. In Radical Candor, this framework will help.